"Arthur, quickly!" cried Mrs. Weasley. Steam was billowing from the train, and it was starting to move. Harry ran to the compartment door, and Ron threw it open and stood back to let him on. They leant out the window and waved at Mr. and Mrs. Weasley until the train turned a corner and blocked them from view. "I need to talk to you in private," Harry muttered to Ron and Hermione as the train picked up speed. "Go away, Ginny," said Ron. "Oh, that's nice," said Ginny huffily, and she stalked off. Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off down the corridor, looking for an empty compartment. But all were full except for the one at the very end of the train. This only had one occupant, a man sitting fast asleep next to the window. Harry, Ron, and Hermione checked on the threshold. The Hogwarts Express was usually reserved for students, and they had never seen an adult there before, except for the witch who pushed the food trolley. The stranger was wearing an extremely shabby set of wizarding robes, which had been darned in several places. He looked ill and exhausted. Though he seemed quite young, his light brown hair was flecked with grey. "Who do you reckon he is?" Ron hissed, as they sat back and slid the door shut, taking the seats furthest away from the window. "Professor R.J. Lupin," whispered Hermione at once. "How do you know that?" "It's on his case," replied Hermione, pointing to the luggage rack over the man's head, where there was a small battered case held together with a large quantity of neatly knotted string. The name Professor R.J. Lupin was stamped across one corner of peeling letters. "Wonder what he teaches," said Ron, frowning at Professor Lupin's pallid profile. "That's obvious," whispered Hermione. "There's only one vacancy, isn't there? Defense against the dark arts." Harry, Ron, and Hermione had already had 2 Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers, both of whom had only lasted 1 year. There were rumors that the job was jinxed. "Well, I hope he's up to it," said Ron doubtfully. "He looks like one good hex would finish him off, doesn't he? Anyway," he turned to Harry. "What were you going to tell us?" Harry explained all about Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's argument and the warning Mr. Weasley had given him. When he finished, Ron looked thunderstruck, and Hermione had her hands over her mouth. She finally lowered them to say, "Sirius Black escaped to come after you? Oh, Harry, you'll have to be really, really careful. Don't go looking for trouble, Harry." "I don't go looking for trouble," said Harry, nettled. "Trouble usually finds me. How thick would Harry have to be to go looking for a nutter who wants to kill him?" said Ron shakily. They were taking the news worse than Harry had expected. Both Ron and Hermione seemed to be much more frightened of Black than he was. "No one knows how he got out of Azkaban," said Ron uncomfortably. "No one has ever done it before, and he was a top security prisoner too." "But they'll catch him, won't they?" said Hermione earnestly. "I mean, they've got all the muggles looking for him too." "What's that noise?" said Ron suddenly. A faint, tinny sort of whistle was coming from somewhere. They looked all around the compartment. "It's coming from your trunk, Harry," said Ron, standing up and reaching into the luggage rack. A moment later, he had pulled out the pocket sneakoscope out from between Harry's robes. It was spinning very fast in the palm of Ron's hand and glowing brilliantly. "Is that a sneakoscope?" said Hermione interestedly, standing up for a better look. "Yep, mind you, it's a very cheap one," Ron said. "It went haywire just as I was tying it to Errol's leg to send it to Harry." "Were you doing anything untrustworthy at the time?" said Hermione shrewdly. "No. Well, I wasn't supposed to be using Errol. You know, he's not really up to long journeys. But how else was I supposed to get Harry's present to him?" "Stick it back in the trunk," Harry advised, as the sneakoscope whistled piercingly, "or it'll wake him up." He nodded towards Professor Lupin. Ron stuffed the sneakoscope into a particularly horrible pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks, which deadened the sound, then closed the lid on the trunk on it. "We could get it checked in Hogsmeade," said Ron, sitting back down. "They sell all that sort of thing at Dervish and Bang's, magical instruments and stuff. Fred and George told me." "Do you know much about Hogsmeade?" asked Hermione keenly. "I've read it. It's the only entirely non-Muggle settlement in Britain." "Yeah, I think it is," said Ron, in an offhand sort of way. But that's not why I want to go. I just want to get inside Honeydukes. What's that? Said Hermione. It's the sweet shop, said Ron, with a dreamy look coming over his face, where they've got everything. Pepper imps, they make you smoke at the mouth, great fat chocolate balls full of strawberry mousse and clotted cream, and really excellent sugar quills, which you can suck in class, and it just looks like you're thinking what to write next. But Hogmeade's a very interesting place, isn't it? Hermione pressed on eagerly. In Sites of Historical Sorcery, it says the inn was the headquarters for the 1612 Goblin Rebellion, and the Shrieking Shack's supposed to be the most severely haunted building in Britain. And massive sherbet balls that make you levitate a few inches off the ground while you're sucking them, said Ron, who was plainly not listening to a word Hermione was saying.